What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my week 3 early running back rankings, my top 30, also splitting these guys up into different tiers, switching up the schedule a little bit. Instead of doing my quarterback, tight end start sits, gonna see how these earlier season running back, wide receiver rankings do. So for this video, looking at the running back position, any fantasy questions, drop them down below. If you enjoy, this video is helpful, I answer your question. Just do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. But let's dive right into tier 1 here. I'm not going to freak out of the order of these guys. If you have them, you're playing them. We have Breece Hall going up against the Patriots, Bijan Robinson going up against the Chiefs, Saquon Barkley going up against the Saints, Jordan Mason against the Rams. And I do feel like with CMC out, Jordan Mason has to be considered a top option at this point. With CMC missing week 1 and week 2, he's put up 22.2 and 17.4 PPR points. And then you're looking at this matchup here. The Rams have given up the 5th most points per game to the running back position. You look at their offense, it's completely decimated. You assume the 49ers, are going to go ahead early. Jordan Mason is going to be the hammer who's racking up a ton of carries and giving you a ton of production on the ground. And then the final guy in tier 1 is going to be Alvin Kamara going up against the Eagles. Not a great matchup, but he has been the running back 1 through 2 weeks. This Saints offense has been a huge surprise. 40 points in back-to-back weeks. So you have to feel good about Alvin Kamara here, operating as their clear-cut top running back. Now, shifting into tier 2, I want to start it off with Devon Achane, who is going up against the Seahawks. And if you guys have been, watching my videos throughout the offseason, you know that I was very, very in on Devon Achane. He was my running back 5 heading into the year. A lot of people did not like that. I was getting a lot of grief in my comments. I had him as my 13th overall player. And through 2 weeks, I'm feeling great about that call. And I think a big, kind of complaint with Devon Achane, or a red flag that people were worried about, was his overall usage. People thought he would never have a large workload. Well, we saw in week 2 with no Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane had 22 carries and 7 targets. It was getting to the point where I drafted him. I had him in my fantasy lineups, and I was getting stressed out because he was getting the ball too much. I don't think they're going to want to, give him 30 plus opportunities a game moving forward, or close to 30, but he's very involved as a pass catcher, 7 targets in both games. Obviously, Tua being out of the lineup is definitely a hit to Achane, the overall ceiling of this offense, but I think the usage has been great through 2 weeks, and he is still going to be a top running back option moving forward. After Achane, we have Jonathan Taylor. He's been fine through 2 weeks, nothing crazy. You would like to see the ceiling of this offense increase, for him to be a better option. If they're getting ahead in games, that's obviously going to be a better game script for Jonathan Taylor. Not the best matchup going against the Bears, but definitely a winnable game where it could be a decent game script for Jonathan Taylor. Then we have Jahmyr Gibbs going up against the Cardinals. I mean, just a solid start to the season for Gibbs. I think he's a nice mid-tier RB1 option. He was pretty much drafted in that mid-tier RB1 area. That's where I have him ranked this week. Then we have James Cook, who is coming off a monster Thursday night performance. And even though, the 3 touchdowns were great, that was awesome to see. In my opinion, what stood out in that game was that he scored a goal line touchdown. And that is kind of the concern with James Cook heading into the year, was yeah, he can be great on the ground. He can be great through the air. He's going to be on a good offense. But he was completely phased out of the goal line last year. Here in 2024, if he's now filtering in on the goal line, we're looking at a running back with legit potential mid to high end RB1 upside. So we'll see if that was just a one-time thing. But if he's consistently getting goal line work, he is going to end up being a monster steal here for fantasy. And then the final guy in tier 2 is going to be Josh Jacobs. He hasn't had monster fantasy days through 2 weeks, but he's had solid performances on the ground. Marshawn Lloyd's going to IR, which I think is the only guy who is realistically going to compete with him for touches. So he's the clear-cut option here. He should be the workhorse. He has 48 carries through the first 2 weeks, so they're force-feeding him on the ground. Have to feel good about Josh Jacobs as an RB1. Now looking at my tier 3 running backs, starting it off here with Travis Etienne, and I'd say that if I drafted Etienne, I'd be a little bit concerned with what we've seen through 2 weeks. Last year, Travis Etienne had a 76% opportunity share. Through 2 games this year, he's at 55%. And not only is he down at 55%, but it hasn't really mattered who the running back 2 has been. It's not like Tank Bigsby was so amazing in week 1 that they just needed to play him in week 2. Tank Bigsby was firmly involved in week 1. Tank Bigsby was hurt, mid-week 2. And you had Dearness Johnson coming in and still handling a decent amount of work. So that is somewhat concerning for his overall ceiling. At this point, he's still getting valuable opportunities, goal line looks. He's getting, some receiving usage. But in terms of like taking over 3/4 of the backfield in 2023 and now taking a little more than half in 2024, that's definitely concerning moving forward. After ETN, we have Joe Mixon, who is going up against the Vikings. He is dealing with an ankle injury. We're just going to have to monitor that throughout the week. He could move down, depending on whether or not he's going to be limited. If he's just not going to play, obviously he would get bumped from the rankings. But the usage has been solid when he's been out there, obviously on a good offense. Then we have Derrick Henry going up against the Cowboys. I'm not really sure how to interpret the week 2 from this Cowboys defense because they went out, just got absolutely torched by the Saints, both through the air and on the ground. Kamara had a great game, so maybe that's a good thing for Derrick Henry, but it's 1 week where the defense got lit up. Not sure if that's indicative of what it's going to look like throughout the rest of the season. So Derrick Henry, I think he's like a fine fringe running back 1, kind of just where he's going to settle in most weeks. Then we have Zach Charbonnet going up against the Dolphins. This may seem high. This is obviously going to be assuming that Kenneth Walker doesn't play. I'd lean towards him not going here with the oblique. It seems like they want to be cautious. I'll also just throw out there here that Isaiah Pacheco, obviously not going to be in these rankings with that broken fibula. But for Zach Charbonnet, without Kenneth Walker in week 2, he had a 96% snap share, a 71% route participation. He had 14 carries, 5 targets, so very, very strong usage. We just saw James Cook just torch this Dolphins defense, so I don't think it's a matchup we should be scared of. I like Zach Charbonnet here as a high-end RB2, and if you drafted him, he had that handcuff upside. You're now getting to reap the benefits of that. I think he should probably be in your lineup unless you're just absolutely stacked. Then we're going to have 3 tier 4 running backs. The first one is going to be James Conner. Through 2 weeks, he has a 77% opportunity share. He is second in red zone touches, so a very strong workload. I guess the one kind of red flag here is just that it's a tough matchup here against this Lions defense, so that's going to hurt him a little bit. Then I have Kyren Williams, and Kyren Williams is honestly a really tough guy to rank here because the usage through 2 weeks has been very strong. If I thought he would have that usage, coming into the year, I would assume he's being ranked as like a top 5 running back. But this offense could truly just be extremely bad. Like they've just been decimated by injuries. The offensive line, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua. Now you're going up against the Niners defense. And Kyren is a good pass catcher, so he's kind of game script proof. But if they're just not moving the ball down the field and they're not scoring, obviously it's going to be very difficult for Kyren to pay off. So running back 16, like higher end RB2, that's kind of just where I'm settling in here. And then we have Ramondre Stevenson, who has been very solid through 2 weeks. I think this Patriots offense has been at least a little bit better than expected in terms of just being able to hang in games to give Ramondre a decent game script. Going up against the Jets, not overly scared of that matchup. So nice mid-tier RB2 play. Now looking at tier 5, I feel like this is where we have like the playable mid-tier RB2s to like back-end RB2s. After this tier, you probably don't love any of the other dudes in your lineup. But starting off in tier 5, this might seem high, but I have Zach Moss. He dominated the usage in week 2. 80% snap share, 63% route participation. He had 75% of the carries within this backfield. And then you look at the matchup here. Bengals are going to be favorites against the Commanders. This should be a solid game script for Zach Moss. My only concern here is that he didn't really play all that great with those opportunities in week 2. So maybe this split kind of balances itself out. But if he retains that usage, I mean, this might end up being a low ranking for Zach Moss just based on the matchup and the usage we saw last week. Then I have Tony Pollard going up against the Packers here. A lot of people, including myself, thought this was going to be a somewhat close split between him and Tajay Spears. That has not been the case through 2 weeks. Tony Pollard has a 71% opportunity share. He is top 10 amongst running backs in targets and carries. So the usage has been there. He's looked good with those opportunities. Have to feel good firing him up as like a top 20 running back at this point. Also, Tajay Spears injured, but not super serious. Looks like he's day-to-day at this point. Then I have David Montgomery, just kind of chugging along, giving you back-to-back solid fantasy weeks. He's not going to be the highest ceiling option because he's not involved as a pass catcher or not overly involved as a pass catcher. And he doesn't have the highest floor just because he's somewhat touchdown dependent, but a good running back on a good offense, solid running back to play. Then I have Aaron Jones going up against the Texans. We do have somewhat of a split here with him and Ty Chandler, especially on the ground, but in the receiving department, that is definitely Aaron Jones' domain. Seems like he pretty much has that on lock. So for this specific week, back end RB2 could be better in better matchups. And then we're going to have Rachaad White here. And this might seem low for Rachaad White, but he has just really struggled through 2 weeks. He struggled as a runner in year 1 and year 2. At some point, we're going to have to see his usage decrease a little bit. On 25 attempts, he's averaging 2 yards per carry. He has the 3rd most rushing yards under expected of all running backs here. So just not a great start to the season for Rachaad White. I don't really hate the matchup here against the Broncos. I think it's pretty decent, but I am projecting Rachaad White to lose a little bit of his workload. Hasn't gotten to the end zone through the first couple of weeks. Don't think that's something that necessarily is going to continue to carry over, but it's not like he's been a smash play early on, so I am kind of willing to make that projection that he decreases a little bit in the workload department. And then we have J.K. Dobbins here at running back 33. And this does feel low for Dobbins just based on the fact that he's been completely dominant over the past couple of weeks. But hear me out here. It's not a good matchup against the Steelers. I think that's pretty clear. I don't think this is going to be a high-scoring game. Probably a gross, grimy, grinded-out game. But he also just has not had the largest workload in terms of dominating the backfield. He has a 52% opportunity share. Now, when you look at his production compared to Gus Edwards, you would assume that he would increase on his workload, right? Because he's just been infinitely better than Gus Edwards. He's leading all running backs in rushing yards over expected. So J.K. Dobbins has been great. But they still seem like they want to operate this split, and in a grosser matchup where J.K. Dobbins hasn't been, overly involved as a pass catcher. It's not like he's racking in a ton of targets here. It does make his ceiling and floor somewhat questionable, more specifically his floor, because we've seen the ceiling the past couple of weeks. It's definitely up there. So that's my concern with J.K. Dobbins. Hopefully we see him take a larger piece of the pie over Gus Edwards, but until we do see that, I'm probably going to appear to be a little bit lower than, maybe others. And then I'm going to be wrapping up tier 5 with Brian Robinson Jr. Been a pretty solid option through 2 weeks. I think he's the clear running back 1 here. Eckler's obviously involved, but Brian Thomas Jr., he's been solid on the ground, has had some involvement as a pass catcher. I feel like you drafted him as a mid to back end RB3. You have to be feeling pretty good about that pick early on in the season. So fringe RB2, back end RB2 option, that's where he's going to settle in for me here. And then looking at tier 6, I think within this tier, some of these dudes are playable. You probably don't love it, but they could be fine. Starting off with Devin Singletary, decent workload through 2 weeks. The Giants clear running back 1. The concern is obviously that this offense sucks and it's a bad matchup here against the Browns. Then I have Najee Harris going up against the Chargers. He's had very solid usage through 2 weeks, 17 plus carries in both games. The issue is he hasn't really done a ton with it. He has not gotten into the end zone. He has a very low weekly floor, and it also doesn't seem like the ceiling is all that high because he's not involved as a pass catcher, and it's not a great matchup here against the Chargers. So the workload could be there. Like I said, I think it's going to be kind of a grimy game. Could favor a guy like Najee Harris, but based on the matchup, the lack of fantasy production through 2 weeks, can't be overly excited. Then we have DeAndre Swift, and this is kind of a tough call because you're balancing the fact that the Bears have just been so atrocious rushing the ball with the fact that the Colts have allowed the most running back rushing yards through 2 weeks. DeAndre Swift's usage has been solid, but he also has really struggled, like I mentioned, so I don't think that's locked in moving forward. He could start to lose opportunities, turn into more of a split committee here. So for Swift, I could see a decent game, but I could also see this being the Colts kind of bouncing back and actually stopping the run a little bit here in week 3. Then I'm going to go with Carson Steele. And based on the comments I got from my waiver wire video, it seems like I might be higher on Carson Steele than consensus compared to a guy like Samaje Perine. But I just think when you're looking at Carson Steele compared to Perine, obviously Isaiah Pacheco now missing time, I just think Carson Steele is the archetype of player that slides better into that Isaiah Pacheco role. We even saw when Pacheco was out there healthy, Carson Steele was still involved on the goal line. He took 4 of the 8 goal line snaps in week 2. I think he can be that early down grinder. And if you're just going to ask me do I want the early down grinder who has touchdown upside, or do I want the third down back, the Jerick McKinnon, but probably not as good as Jerick McKinnon and not as established? I just want the guy that has the touchdown upside within this offense. I do think the Kareem Hunt signing kind of clouds this long term, but I don't think Kareem Hunt's coming in on a short week and taking over this backfield. like, I think we also just can't forget, like, he's a free agent for a reason, right? Like, he knows the system. That's why they're bringing him in. But it's not like this is Kareem Hunt from 5 years ago, who's like some sort of world beater. He's probably not all that good anymore. So just give me the flyer on the younger option, on the good offense, who should have that touchdown upside. Maybe I'm wrong, and it's Kareem Hunt, it's Samaje Perine, and Carson Steele's an afterthought. But if I have to kind of plant my flag on one of these guys, it would be Carson Steele. After Carson Steele, we have Zamir White. And if Zamir White does not get it done this week, it's probably never going to happen. This is a dream matchup against the Panthers. They have allowed the fourth most points per game to the running back position. I believe they have allowed the second most rushing yards through 2 weeks, and the Raiders are 5.5-point favorites. So the issue for Zamir White has been that when the Raiders are trailing, they pivot to Alexander Mattison. He has not racked up large workloads. He has not been efficient on the ground. This is the opportunity, right? Panthers have not stopped the run. This should be a favorable game script. Zamir White needs to get it done here, and if you drafted him, you're probably playing him just based on the matchup. But if he cannot get it done, we're going to have some serious issues moving forward with his fantasy relevancy. Then after Zamir White, going with Jerome Ford going up against the Giants. This might seem low for Jerome Ford. It really just comes down to some concerning usage in week 2. He only had a 44% snap share, 39% route participation. He only took 7 of the 22 carries, so less than a third of the carries within this backfield. We'll see if Deonta Foreman is as involved as he was last week, but I could see a world where if Foreman sticks with like close to 2/3 of the carries, that he's actually the better option here, just based on the potential game script against the Giants, where the Browns should go ahead, should be kind of running it out to end it. And then the final running back here, Javonte Williams going up against the Buccaneers. We saw much better usage out of him in week 2, took 11 of the 15 carries, saw all 5 running back targets. That was after being out-carried and out-targeted by Jaleel McLaughlin in week 1. And actually the Buccaneers, even though historically they've had a very tough run defense, they've actually been pretty susceptible to fantasy running backs through the first couple of weeks. So not overly concerned about the matchup. My concern is just the fact that this Broncos offense has looked completely miserable through 2 weeks. So it's really tough to have like any sort of confidence with these Broncos weapons. But if you're super desperate, like mid-tier RB3, I think that's the play. I think that ended up being top 31 instead of top 30, but it is what it is. Like I said, tried something new this week with these earlier, in the week running back wide receiver rankings. Check the wideouts out later today if you haven't seen them already. Let me know your thoughts on these. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.